Sensible safeguards are not in opposition to innovation. Accountability is not a burden, far from it. They are the foundation of how we can move ahead while protecting public trust. They are how we can lead the world in technology and science, but also in promoting our democratic values. Otherwise, in the absence of that trust, I think we may well lose both.
We could be looking at one of the most significant technological innovations in human history. What kind of technology will this be? How will we use it to better our lives? How will we use it to actually harness power of technological innovation for the good of the American people?
OpenAI was founded on the belief that artificial intelligence has the potential to improve nearly every aspect of our lives. Also that it creates serious risks we have to work together to manage. We're here because people love this technology. We think it can be a printing press moment. We have to work together to make it so. We are governed by a nonprofit, and our activities are driven by our mission and our charter, which commit us to working to ensure that the broad distribution of the benefits of AI and to maximizing the safety of AI systems. We are working to build tools that one day can help us make new discoveries and address some of humanity's biggest challenges, like climate change and curing cancer. Our current systems aren't yet capable of doing these things. We're very optimistic that there are going to be fantastic jobs in the future and that current jobs can get much better. We believe that the benefits of the tools we have deployed so far vastly outweigh the risks, but ensuring their safety is vital to our work, and we make significant efforts to ensure that safety is built into our systems at all levels. Before releasing any new system, OpenAI conducts extensive testing, engages external experts for detailed reviews and independent audits, improves the model's behavior, and implements robust safety and monitoring systems. Before we released GPT-4, we spent over 6 months conducting extensive evaluations, external red teaming, and dangerous capability testing. We are proud of the progress that we made. GPT-4 is more likely to respond helpfully and truthfully and refuse harmful requests than any other widely deployed model of similar capability. We think that regulatory intervention by governments will be critical to mitigate the risks of increasingly powerful models. For example, the US government might consider a combination of licensing and testing requirements for development and release of AI models above a threshold of capabilities. There are several other areas I mentioned in my written testimony where I believe that companies like ours can partner with governments, including ensuring that the most powerful AI models adhere to a set of safety requirements, facilitating processes to develop and update safety measures, and examining opportunities for global coordination. And as you mentioned, I think it's important that companies have their own responsibility here, no matter what Congress does. This is a remarkable time to be working on artificial intelligence. But as this technology advances, we understand that people are anxious about how it could change the way we live. We are too. But we believe that we can and must work together to identify and manage the potential downsides so that we can all enjoy the tremendous upsides. It is essential that powerful AI is developed with democratic values in mind, and this means that US leadership is critical. I believe that we will be able to mitigate the risks in front of us and really capitalize on this technology's potential to grow the US economy and the world's.
While AI may be having its moment, the moment for government to play a role has not passed us by. This period of focused public attention on AI is precisely the time to define and build the right guardrails to protect people and their interests. IBM urges Congress to adopt a precision regulation approach to AI. This means establishing rules to govern the deployment of AI in specific use cases, not regulating the technology itself. Such an approach would involve 4 things. First, different rules for different risks. The strongest regulation should be applied to use cases with the greatest risks to people and society. Second, clearly defining risks. There must be clear guidance on AI uses or categories of AI-supported activity that are inherently high risk. This common definition is key to enabling a clear understanding of what regulatory requirements will apply in different use cases and contexts. Third, be transparent. Consumers should know when they're interacting with an AI system. No person anywhere should be tricked into interacting with an AI system. And finally, showing the impact. For higher risk use cases, companies should be required to conduct impact assessments that show how their systems perform against tests for bias and other ways that they could potentially impact the public, and to attest that they've done so. The era of AI cannot be another era of move fast and break things. We don't have to slam the brakes on innovation either.
Fundamentally, these new systems are going to be destabilizing. It can and will create persuasive lies at a scale humanity has never seen before. Outsiders will use them to affect our elections, insiders to manipulate our markets and our political systems. systems. Democracy itself is threatened. Chatbots will also clandestinely shape our opinions, potentially exceeding what social media can do. Choices about data sets that AI companies use will have enormous unseen influence. Those who choose the data will make the rules, shaping society in subtle but powerful ways. There are other risks too, many stemming from the inherent unreliability of current systems. Poor medical advice could have serious consequences too. An open source large language model recently seems to have played a role in a person's decision to take their own life. The large language model asked the human, if you wanted to die, why didn't you do it earlier? And then followed up with, were you thinking of me when you overdosed? Without ever referring the patient to the human help that was obviously needed. Another system rushed out and made available to millions of children told a person posing as a 13-year-old how to lie to her parents about a trip with a 31-year-old man. Further threats continue to emerge regularly. A month after GPT-4 was released, OpenAI released ChatGPT plugins, which quickly led others to develop something called AutoGPT, direct access to the internet, the ability to write source code, and increased powers of automation. This may well have drastic and difficult to predict security consequences. What criminals are going to do here is to create counterfeit people. It's hard to even envision the consequences of that. We have built machines that are like bulls in a china shop, powerful, reckless, and difficult to control. We all more or less agree on the values we would like for our AI systems to honor. We want, for example, for our systems to be transparent, protect our privacy, to be free of bias, and above all else, to be safe. Current systems are not in line with these values. Current systems are not transparent. They do not adequately protect our privacy, and they continue to perpetuate bias. And even their makers don't entirely understand how they work. Most of all, we cannot remotely guarantee that they're safe, and hope here is not enough. The big tech company's preferred plan boils down to trust us. But why should we? The sums of money at stake are mind-boggling. Missions drift. OpenAI's original mission statement proclaimed, our goal is to advance AI in the way that is most likely to benefit humanity as a whole, unconstrained by a need to generate financial return. 7 years later, they're largely beholden to Microsoft, embroiled in part in an epic battle of search engines that routinely make things up. And that's forced Alphabet to rush out products and de-emphasize safety. Humanity has taken a back seat. AI is moving incredibly fast with lots of potential, but also lots of risks. We obviously need government involved, and we need the tech companies involved, both big and small. But we also need independent scientists, not just so that we scientists can have a voice, but so that we can participate directly in addressing the problems and evaluating solutions. And not just after products are released, but before. We need tight collaboration between independent scientists and governments in order to hold the companies' feet to the fire. Allowing independent scientists access to these systems before they are widely released as part of a clinical trial-like safety evaluation is a vital first step. We have unprecedented opportunities here, but we are also facing a perfect storm of corporate irresponsibility, widespread deployment, lack of adequate regulation, and inherent unreliability. AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever, already changing things more rapidly than almost any technology in history.
I think you have said, in fact, and I'm going to quote, development of superhuman machine intelligence is probably the greatest threat to the continued existence of humanity, end quote. You may have had in mind the effect on jobs, which is really my biggest nightmare.
Like with all technological revolutions, I expect there to be significant impact on jobs, but exactly what that impact looks like is very difficult to predict. If we went back to the other side of a previous technological revolution, talking about the jobs that exist on the other side, you can go back and read books of this. It's what people said at the time. It's difficult. I believe that there will be far greater jobs on the other side of this, and that the jobs of today will get better. First of all, I think it's important to understand and think about GPT-4 as a tool, not a creature, which is easy to get confused, and it's a tool that people have a great deal of control over in how they use it. And second, GPT-4 and other systems like it are good at doing tasks, not jobs. And so you see already people that are using GPT-4 to do their job much more efficiently by helping them with tasks. Now, GPT-4 will entirely automate away some jobs, and it will create new ones that we believe will be much better as our quality of life raises and as machines and tools that we create can help us live better lives. The bar raises for what we do, and our human ability and what we spend our time going after goes after more ambitious, more satisfying projects. So there will be an impact on jobs. We try to be very clear about that, and I think it will require partnership between the industry and government, but mostly action by government to figure out how we want to mitigate that. But I'm very optimistic about how great the jobs of the future will be.
New jobs will be created, many more jobs will be transformed, and some jobs will transition away. I'm a personal example of a job that didn't exist when I joined IBM, and I have a team of AI governance professionals who are in new roles that we created, as early as 3 years ago. So I think the most important thing that we could be doing and can and should be doing now is to prepare the workforce of today and the workforce of tomorrow for partnering with AI technologies.
Past performance history is not a guarantee of the future. It has always been the case in the past that we have had more jobs, that new jobs, new professions come in as new technologies come in. I think this one's going to be different, and the real question is over what time scale. Is it going to be 10 years? Is it going to be 100 years? And I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question. I think in the long run, so-called artificial general intelligence really will replace a large fraction of human jobs. We're not that close to artificial general intelligence. Despite all of the media hype and so forth, I would say that what we have right now is just a small sampling of the AI that we will build. But when we get to AGI, artificial general intelligence, that really is going to have, I think, profound effects on labor.
I think jobs and employment and what we're all going to do with our time really matters. I agree that when we get to very powerful systems, the landscape will change. I think I'm just more optimistic that we are incredibly creative and we find new things to do, better tools, and that will keep happening. My worst fears are that we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world. I think that could happen in a lot of different ways. It's why we started the company. It's a big part of why I'm here today. I think if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong, and we want to be vocal about that. We want to work with the government to prevent that from happening, but we try to be very clear-eyed about what the downside case is and the work that we have to do to mitigate that.
Should we be concerned about large language models that can predict, survey opinion, and then can help organizations, entities fine-tune strategies to elicit behaviors from voters? Should we be worried about this for our election?
It's one of my areas of greatest concern. The more general ability of these models to manipulate, to persuade, to provide sort of one-on-one, interactive disinformation. I think that's like a broader version of what you're talking about, but given that we're going to face an election next year and these models are getting better, I'm nervous about it. I think people are able to adapt quite quickly. When Photoshop came onto the scene a long time ago, for a while people were really fooled by Photoshopped images and then pretty quickly developed an understanding that images might be Photoshopped. This will be like that, but on steroids.
What agency of this government do you think exists that could respond to the challenge that you've laid down today?
My view is that we probably need a cabinet-level organization within the United States in order to address this. The number of risks is large. The amount of information to keep up on is so much. I think we need a lot of technical expertise. I think we need a lot of coordination of these efforts. AI is going to be such a large part of our future and is so complicated and moving so fast. I personally have suggested, in fact, that we should want to do this in a global way.
I think the U.S. should lead here and do things first. But to be effective, we do need something global. As you mentioned, this can happen everywhere. We are quite concerned about the impact this can have on elections. I think this is an area where hopefully the entire industry and the government can work together quickly. This is a tool that a user is using to help generate content more efficiently than before. They can change it. They can test the accuracy of it. If they don't like it, they can get another version. But it still then spreads through social media or other ways. Like ChatGPT is a single player experience where you're just using this. And so I think as we think about what to do, that's important to understand. There's a lot that we can and do there. There's things that the model refuses to generate. We have policies. We also importantly have monitoring. So at scale, we can detect someone generating a lot of those tweets, even if generating one tweet is okay.
The simplest way and the most effective way is have an agency that is more nimble and smarter than Congress, which should be easy to create, overlooking what you do.
Yes, we'd be enthusiastic about that.
You agree with that, Mr. Marcus?
Absolutely.
You agree with that, Ms. Montgomery?
I don't think so.
So IBM says we don't need an agency. And you also agree that China's doing AI research. Is that right?
Correct.
This world organization that doesn't exist, maybe it will, but if you don't do something about the China part of it, you'll never quite get this right. Do you agree?
It doesn't necessarily have to be a world organization, but there has to be some sort of standard, some sort of set of controls that do have global effect.
Could AI create a situation where a drone can select the target itself?
I think we shouldn't allow that.
Well, can it be done?
Sure.
Thanks.
A big part of why we do it is that we believe iterative deployment and giving people in our institutions and you all time to come to grips with this technology, to understand it, to find its limitations, its benefits, the regulations we need around it, what it takes to make it safe. That's really important. Going off to build a super powerful AI system in secret and then dropping it on the world all at once, I think would not go well. A big part of our strategy is, while these systems are still relatively weak and deeply imperfect, to find ways to get people to have experience with them, to have contact with reality, and to figure out what we need to do to make it safer and better.
Please tell me in plain English, 2 or 3 reforms, regulations you would implement.
Disclosure of the data that's used to train AI, disclosure of the model and how it performs, and making sure that there's continuous governance over these models.
Okay, so we ought to first pass a law that says you can use AI for these uses but not others. Is that what you're saying?
We need to define the highest risk uses
Is
of AI.
there anything else?
Requiring companies to show their work, protecting data that's used to train AI in the first place.
Number one, a safety review like we use with the FDA prior to widespread deployment. Number two, a nimble monitoring agency to follow what's going on, not just pre-review, but also post as things are out there in the world with authority to call things back. And number three would be funding geared towards things like AI constitution, AI that can reason about what it's doing. It would not leave things entirely to current technology, which I think is poor at behaving in ethical fashion and behaving in honest fashion.
Number one, I would form a new agency that licenses any effort above a certain scale of capabilities and can take that license away and ensure compliance with safety standards. Number two, I would create a set of safety standards focused on as the dangerous capability evaluations. One example that we've used in the past is looking to see if a model can self-replicate and self-exfiltrate into the wild. And then third, I would require independent audits. So not just from the company or the agency, but experts who can say the model is or isn't in compliance with these stated safety thresholds and these percentages of performance on question X or Y.
Make a lot of money, do you?
I paid enough for health insurance. I have no equity in OpenAI. I'm doing this because I love it.
What do you consider a harmful request?
One would be about violent content. Another would be about content that's encouraging self-harm. Another is adult content. Not that we think adult content is inherently harmful, but there's things that could be associated with that we cannot reliably enough differentiate, so we refuse all of it.
What do the two of you even envision as a potential licensing scheme that would provide the kind of guardrails?
There are things besides, should this content be generated or not, that I think are also important. So I think it'd be a great policy to say generated images need to be made clear in all contexts that they were generated. And, then we still have the image out there, but we're at least requiring people to say this was a generated image. As we head towards artificial general intelligence and the impact that will have and the power of that technology, I think we need to treat that as seriously as we treat other very powerful technologies. And that's where I personally think we need such a scheme.
We don't know how to build a system that understands harm in the full breadth of its meaning. The model that I tend to gravitate towards, but I am not an expert here, is the FDA, at least as part of it, in terms of you have to make a safety case and say why the benefits outweigh the harms in order to get that license. But I think that the safety case part of it is incredibly important. You have to be able to have external reviewers that are scientifically qualified look at this and say, have you addressed enough? There should be an external agency that says, well, we need to be reassured if you're going to release this product that there aren't going to be cybersecurity problems, or there are ways of addressing it.
Is your view that the federal government would make laws such that certain capabilities or functionalities themselves are forbidden?
I think that there should be limits on what a deployed model is capable of and then what it actually does too.
Companies whose revenues depend upon volume of use, screen time, intensity of use, design these systems in order to maximize the engagement of all users, including children.
We try to design systems that do not maximize for engagement. In fact, we're so short on GPUs, the less people use our products, the better. But we're not an advertising-based model, not trying to get people to use it more and more. These systems do have the capability to influence in obvious and in very nuanced ways. I think that's particularly important for the safety of children, but that will impact all of us. One of the things that we'll do ourselves, regulation or not, but I think a regulatory approach would be good for also, is requirements about how the values of these systems are set and how these systems respond to questions that can cause influence. We started as a nonprofit, really focused on how this technology was going to be built. At the time, it was very outside the Overton window that something like AGI was even possible. That's shifted a lot. We didn't know at the time how important scale was going to be, but we did know that we wanted to build this with humanity's best interest at heart.
Are you worried about the corporate concentration in this space and what effect it might have and the associated risks perhaps with market concentration in AI?
I think there will be many people that develop models. What's happening on the open source community is amazing, but there will be a relatively small number of providers that can make models at the at the true
Is there
leading
danger
edge.
in that?
I think there is benefits and danger to that. Like, as we were talking about all of the dangers with AI, the fewer of us that you really have to keep a careful eye on the absolute like bleeding edge of capabilities, there's benefits there. I think there needs to be enough, and there will, because there's so much value, that consumers have choice, that we have different ideas.
There's a real risk of a kind of technocracy combined with oligarchy, where a small number of companies influence people's beliefs through the nature of these systems.
One thing that I think is very important is that what these systems get aligned to, whose values, what those bounds are, that is somehow set by society as a whole, by governments as a whole. And so creating that data set, our alignment data set, it could be, an AI constitution, whatever it is, that has got to come very broadly from society.
What are some of the perils of an agency that we would have to be mindful of in order to make certain that its goals of protecting many of those interests I just mentioned, privacy, bias, intellectual property, disinformation, would be the winners and not the losers?
The regulatory pressure should be on us. It should be on Google. It should be on the other small set of people in the lead the most. We don't want to slow down smaller startups. We don't want to slow down open source efforts. We still need them to comply with things. You can still cause great harm with a smaller model, but leaving the room and the space for new ideas and new companies and independent researchers to do their work, and not putting a regulatory burden that, say, a company like us could handle but a smaller one couldn't. I think that's another peril, and it's clearly a way that regulation has gone.
The other obvious peril is regulatory capture. If we make it appear as if we are doing something, but it's more like greenwashing and nothing really happens. We just keep out the little players because we put so much burden that only the big players can do it. So there are also those kinds of perils. I fully agree with everything that Mr. Altman said, and I would add that to the list.
One of the things I would add to the list is the risk of not holding companies accountable for the harms that they're causing today, right? So we talk about misinformation in electoral systems.
One thing that is absolutely paramount, I think, is far greater transparency about what the models are and what the data are. That doesn't necessarily mean everybody in the general public has to know exactly what's in one of these systems, but I think it means that there needs to be some enforcement arm that can look at these systems, can look at the data, can perform tests, and so forth. I think medical misinformation is something to really worry about. We have systems that hallucinate things. They're going to hallucinate medical advice. Some of the advice they'll give is good, some of it's bad. We need really tight regulation around that. Same with psychiatric advice, people using these things as kind of ersatz therapists. I think we need to be concerned about internet access for these tools when they can start making requests, both of people and internet things. It's probably okay if they just do search, but as they do more intrusive things on the internet, like do we want them to be able to order equipment or order chemistry and so forth? So as we empower these systems more by giving them internet access, I think we need to be concerned about that. And then we've hardly talked at all about long-term risks. Sam alluded to it briefly. I don't think that's where we are right now, but as we start to approach machines that have a larger footprint on the world beyond just having a conversation, we need to worry about that and think about how we're going to regulate that and monitor it and so forth. These systems are almost like counterfeit people, and we don't really honestly understand what the consequence of that is. They're not perfectly human like that, but they're good enough to fool a lot of the people a lot of the time, and that introduces lots of problems, for example, cybercrime and how people might try to manipulate markets and so forth. So it's a serious concern.
We spent most of the time today on current risks, and I think that's appropriate, and I'm very glad we have done it. As these systems do become more capable, I think it's important that we also spend time talking about how we're going to confront those challenges.
Having talked to you privately,
You know how much I care.
I agree that you care deeply and intensely.
Let me just add for the record that I'm sitting next to Sam, closer than I've ever sat to him except once before in my life, and that his sincerity in talking about those fears is very apparent physically in a way that just doesn't communicate on the television screen, but communicates from here.
So I've been keeping a little list here of potential downsides or harms, risks, of generative AI, even in its current form. Let's just run through it. Loss of jobs. And this isn't speculative. I think your company, Ms. Montgomery, has announced that it's potentially laying off 7,800 people, a third of your non-consumer facing workforce because of AI. So loss of jobs, invasion of privacy, personal privacy, on a scale we've never before seen, manipulation of personal behavior, manipulation of personal opinions, and potentially the degradation of free elections in America. Did I miss anything? This is quite a list. I noticed that an eclectic group of about 1,000 technology and AI leaders, everybody from Andrew Yang to Elon Musk, recently called for a 6-month moratorium on any further AI development. Were they right? Do you join those calls? Are they right to do that? Should we pause for 6 months?
Your characterization's not quite correct. I actually signed that letter. About 27,000 people signed it. It did not call for a ban on all AI research. research, but only on a very specific thing, which would be systems like GPT-5. Every other piece of research that's ever been done, it was actually supportive or neutral about, specifically called for more research on trustworthy and safe AI.
So you think that we should take a moratorium, a 6-month moratorium or more, on anything beyond ChatGPT-4?
The moratorium that we should focus on is actually deployment until we have good safety cases. I don't know that we need to pause that particular project, but I do think its emphasis on focusing more on AI safety, on trustworthy, reliable AI, is exactly right.
Would you pause any further development for 6 months or longer?
After we finished training GPT-4, we waited more than 6 months to deploy it. We are not currently training what will be GPT-5. We don't have plans to do it in the next 6 months. But I think the frame of the letter is wrong. What matters is audits, red teaming, safety standards that a model needs to pass before training. If we pause for 6 months, then I'm not really sure what we do then. Do we pause for another 6? Do we kind of come up with some rules then? The standards that we have developed and that we've used for GPT-4 deployment, we want to build on those, but we think that's the right direction, not a calendar clock pause. There may be times, I expect there will be times, when we find something that we don't understand and we really do need to take a pause, but we don't see that yet.
I think we need to use the time to prioritize ethics and responsible technology as opposed to pausing development.
Well, wouldn't a pause in development help the development of protocols for safety standards and ethics?
I'm not sure how practical it is to pause, but we absolutely should be prioritizing safety protocols.
Okay, the point about practicality leads me to this. I'm interested in this talk about an agency, and maybe that would work. They usually get controlled by the people who they're supposed to be watching. I mean, that's just been our history for 100 years. Maybe this agency would be different.
I think it's important to democratize the inputs to these systems, the values that we're going to align to, and I think it's also important to give people wide use of these tools. When we started the API strategy, which is a big part of how we make our systems available for anyone to use, there was a huge amount of skepticism over that, and it does come with challenges, that's for sure. We think putting this in the hands of a lot of people and not in the hands of a few companies is really quite important, and we are seeing the resultant innovation boom from that. But it is absolutely true that the number of companies that can train the true frontier models is going to be small just because of the resources required, and so I think there needs to be incredible scrutiny on us and our competitors. I think there is a rich and exciting industry happening of incredibly good research and new startups that are not just using our models but creating their own, and I think it's important to make sure that whatever regulatory stuff happens, whatever new agencies may or may not happen, we preserve that fire. It is definitely important to talk about who's going to create the models. I also think it's really important to decide to whose values we're going to align these models. But in terms of using the models, the people that build on top of the OpenAI API do incredible things. And it's, people frequently comment like, I can't believe you get this much technology for this little money. And so the companies people are building, putting AI everywhere, using our API, which does let us put safeguards in place, I think that's quite exciting. And I think that is how it is being not how it's going to be, how it is being democratized right now.